You are live. Not everybody's live, but I'm live. I'm broadcasting here on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. And I'm going to do a little bit of nonsense for the first 3 or 4 minutes to let people show up if they do show up. And then I'm going to get into waiver wire stuff. Actually, I wanted to talk about that. Like, what my first thing is, what are my plans for this year? The scores were live, so I don't have to apologize for technical issues. And the idea would be to download the audio, and then send out the audio as a podcast sometime later today. And that'll be the advantage. If you show up here live at 11 o'clock, you can ask me questions directly, and you can get the information first. I'm probably going to be moving. I told Andrea that I was going to do this a little while ago, and I had forgotten that in the pandemic, I have a regular 9 o'clock morning phone call with my nephew, who I moved to Florida to be closer to, and I haven't really seen him. And that's on Saturday, so I don't always get free early enough, and there'll be times when I need the last couple hours to get ready. And so I'm probably going to move this show to Sunday, so we'll have your Sunday noon fantasy baseball talk covered. If you want to ask me a question, you can always email me beforehand or reach me by any of the other many ways that we reach me. I will be paying close attention to the chat room on the Lenny Melnick site, and cursory attention to the chat rooms on YouTube. No attention to YouTube, a little bit of Facebook. So if you really want to get me, go to the site to get me there. The plan is to talk about waiver wire every week. So the show's going to broadcast from now until the last week of the season, barring maybe I'll take a week off somewhere, or maybe I'll have a week where I broadcast at a different time to make way for something that I might be doing on the weekend somewhere in there, 4th of July, whatever. But the idea is here to give you information that'll help you participate more strongly, hopefully win. This show has been tested with 15,000 people in South Africa, and it's shown to be 77% effective. The reason I'm here on Saturday is because you get the first dose from me. You're at 77% effective. Then Andrea will come on at 12 or 12:30, and it rises to 95% effectiveness, because the second dose is that important. But you guys all know that. You live in the same world I do. And we're going to talk. What the hell is this? We got some noise from one of my open windows. I got rid of it. Sorry about that. And that's what. What the heck is this? Is this coming from the Lenny site? Well, let me do this. Come on. All right. That'll work. All right. Sorry about that. And that's the technical difficulties. Maybe I'll edit out of the podcast, but maybe I won't. You'll have to wait and see. And like I said, we're going to focus on something out there might make me take notice of something other than building your team. But the idea here is I go through a process every week for the teams that I run, and I'm going to let you in on a little bit of my process, but at minimum, the results of my process. And if you want me to talk about Francisco Linder's contract, maybe I'd say sometime. But whether he gets paid $35 million a year or $50 million a year or $15 million a year, it's not going to make your team any better or any worse. So we're going to stick with the other stuff. And we're going to talk about this in context. When you're talking about waiver wire, there are two things that are important. One is talent, and the other is playing time. So we're going to start with talking about things we noticed this week when it comes to playing time. Everything that we did beforehand, what we thought the starting lineups are going to be, what we thought who was going to play at what position, who were the five pitchers, was all speculative until the league started. And now that they started, we know some things. And so in this spot, I would talk about trades, but I'm going to start with the injuries this week. And there's a number of those. The most noticeable to me personally was the Josh Donaldson coming up limp after hitting a double. His first at bat of the year. We all knew Josh Donaldson. I was a person that said before the season that you could wait a little bit on third base because you had guys that were going late, like Donaldson, Bryant, and Turner. And I did say that if you're drafting Turner or Donaldson, you probably should have a backup third baseman on your team. In the one league where, truthfully, I only got Donaldson in one league. That's a Yahoo league, and my backup third baseman there would have been Ty France. In another league, I didn't get him, but I wanted him. In that league, though, I did have DJ LeMahieu, which would allow him to slot over to third and bring in a first baseman. But if you were drafting Josh Donaldson, you probably should have had a plan beforehand. It looks like the guy that's going to get the playing time because of him is Luis Arias, who's a decent little pickup. Very good batting average, among the league leaders in contact percentage. I think his swinging strike rate is in the 5 or below range. So he's a guy that could very easily hit you 300, 320. It seems like based on the first 2 games of the season that they batted him right at the top of the lineup. The first game he did as a playing, I think, second base, and then the second game at third base, or maybe he was in the outfield for the first game. I have that in the notes when I get to playing. So Trevor Rosenthal put on the 10-day IL with shoulder inflammation. Seems like Jake Diekman is the obvious pickup in that spot. He's not a guy that you should invest heavily in because I don't believe that he'll only have that spot no matter how good he is. Well, if he's lights out, no one touches him. Maybe he keeps it, but he's just a placeholder for Rosenthal. So if you're fab bidding, a save is a save is a save, but you're looking at probably best case scenario 3 weeks, likely 2 weeks of Jake Diekman. And I do want to take a moment to say I'll do it after. Then Adalberto Mondesi was kind of a surprise guy that went onto the IL as the season started, which opened up the shortstop spot for Nicky Lopez, who's somebody that is irrelevant fantasy-wise. But it's sad to see that Mondesi's out. He has a strained oblique, and there's no timetable for his return. Everyone heard about Eloy Jimenez and his pectoral surgery to knock him out put him on a 60-day L and knock him out for 4 or 5 months. The beneficiary of that is, as far as play name goes, probably Lurie Garcia, who is somebody that is only injury replacement in the deepest of leagues because he might get a stolen base and his average will be about 270, which won't kill you. It really helps out Andrew Vaughn because it probably puts him in a situation where he's going to get outfield eligibility, and it helps out the 2 backup catchers who are going to be the DH. Unfortunately, in many leagues, for some unknown reason, and this is the last thing we're going to talk about tonight, both Yerwin Mercedes and Zach Collins don't have catcher eligibility, which is silly, and I'll talk about that later. Eduardo Rodriguez, came back from the COVID problem, and he has arm fatigue. Put somebody in I don't know who would put in their lineup directly. I think Tanner Houck was the guy because he had such a miserable spring training. He sort of played himself out, but I don't think it does anything that really helps us fantasy-wise. Luke Voigt has a knee surgery and has a partially torn meniscus. He'll be out 3-week minimum, probably 4 or 5 weeks, which brings into play Jay Bruce, who isn't the worst player in the world. He's a guy if you're in the kind of league where you could use somebody that has a low batting average and a decent amount of home runs, and that could help you, he could help you. In shallower leagues, the 12, 10-team leagues, he's kind of meaningless. In 15-team leagues, something could happen there. And I do think he actually has outfield eligibility, so he'd be outfield first base. Kyle Lewis was a bit of a surprise opening day scratch, and he got put on the 10-day with the bone bruise, and he has no timetable for return. So that put us in a situation in Seattle where we not only got Taylor Trammell's debut, but he had won that position. But they're giving a guy that was once a fairly hyped prospect, Jake Fraley, a shot to play the outfield on the other side. And I'm not recommending you pick up Fraley, but he's definitely somebody you should watch. Trammell in deep leagues is a pickup. J-Man Choi The day before opening day, it was announced that he was going under arthroscopic knee surgery. He'll be out for 4 to 5 weeks. The big winner in that spot is Yoshi Tsutsugo, who is a good hitter from Japan who played in 50 games last year and didn't look so hot. But he's been batting leadoff for them because of his high on-base percentage. And Hwang Young Kim, pitcher that I was high on before the season of Seattle Cardinals, I'm still high on. He's going to miss his first start. And the guy that's the beneficiary of that open spot is Dan Ponce de Leon, who is also scheduled to be talked about a little bit more down the road a bit. Because, of course, there's a bunch of other injuries out there, like the Zach Gallen and the Kel Calhoun and the George Springer. And I assume that you guys, because these were things that were known beforehand, that you guys knew about what happened there. Then we'll talk a little bit about the results of those things when we go through the lineups. There's two things here that a little bit of housekeeping. One is I talk kind of fast, and for that reason, I'm going to decide to lean into it as opposed to think of that as being an issue. I found that I've been told by a sizable minority of my listeners on the podcast that they listen to my show at 1.25 or 1.5 speed because what they want is they want the information. And I'm okay with that. So if I give the information quicker, that's fine. If you think I'm going too fast and you need something to be clarified, join me in the chat room and I'll slow down for you personally, or you can email me afterwards and I'll answer you that way. The other thing is that in this spot, I've saved some spot in what I do to talk about hot players and cold players, but I think it's fairly silly to talk about that with only 2 games under our belt. Maybe next week we can do that, but there'll be a 5 or 10 minutes devoted to that right about here. And then we look at lineup changes because this is where you look at playability. And we'll go through this team by team, even though some of these have already been mentioned a little bit because of the injuries. And they're in no particular order, just the order that I wrote things down, because part of what I'm trying to do to make this easier on me, is that as things occur to me through the week, I jot the notes down. So they're in more chronological order than they are in alphabetical or order of importance. So let's start with the New York Yankees. The big thing there is Jay Bruce. He playing first base. He batted 8th in the first game, and he's a guy that might get you some power if you need power. He's a deep league pickup only, kind of guy that in a shallow league, if he has a hot week or something, you might pick him up. But he's not relevant for 80% of leagues that are out there. Arizona Diamondbacks were the second guys on my list. Actually, they were first. Some reason I put the Yankees before them. And the one that got me was on day one, Josh Rojas, who was acquired in the Zach Greinke trade, who had a very hot spring, and a guy that had a really good 2019 in the minors. He won the opening day job at second base, but then they had an injury to Nick Ahmed, who might have come back, and they actually played him at shortstop. So if you're in a 5-game shortstop eligibility league, this guy might get shortstop, second base, outfield eligibility altogether in certain leagues. In the other leagues, leagues where it takes 20, it probably won't get that far. But the fact that they're putting him at shortstop means that they're going to find ways to keep him in the lineup, and so he's worth an add in most leagues. He bet lead off. He hasn't done anything with it yet, but it's only 2 games, and we don't jump off the cliff for 2 games, except for in some of the worst pitching performances. And so Twins, we already talked. Oh, sorry. They also had Tim LaCastro. He batted leadoff in the second game, and he versus the lefty Blake Snell. So he's a guy that's worth. He's a guy that is really good at getting on base and really good at stealing bases, and worth an add in leagues that are deep where you need stolen bases. And then the guy that batted 8th in game 2 versus Blake Snell was Wyatt Matheson. And now Wyatt Matheson is completely unimportant. And I say that because I want him to be awesome and bite me in the butt, because it's always great to have another awesome player. But the reason that note is there is because the Arizona Diamondbacks decided on the second game of the season that they were going to bench David Peralta versus the lefty. I know David Peralta is somebody that a lot of people love. I'm not in that group, at least at the level they are. I know he's cheap, and because he's cheap, there's a lot of value there. But if he's not going to play versus left-handers, and they're telegraphing that that's what they're going to do, there's really no point in. I think there's probably better options out there in the outfield for you. And as I just took a second because my glasses were fogging up, I can't read my notes. Next up on the list is Delhi Dodgers. On the opening day lineup, people were wondering who was going to win the second base job, Chris Taylor or Gavin Lux on opening day. The guy that got benched was A.J. Pollock, and Lux played second, and Taylor played the outfield. That's good news for Taylor owners because it means that even if Lux beats him out, he might get that Kiki Hernandez role where he plays enough games to be meaningful, even though he's not necessarily the starter. I know some people are saying that Zach McKinstry might be that guy. He's too far down the pecking order for me to like. The second game came in and they benched Lux in favor of Pollock, so there's gonna be a lot of screwing around with that lineup. But the Dodgers are good at that. They're gonna screw around with every part of the lineup. I think they're even gonna screw around with Trevor Bauer. I can't think of anybody. Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager are not going to get screwed with. Everyone else is. Bauer is going to complain about it, but he's got to pitch well enough to make his complaints meaningful. And there's a chance he's had some awesome years and he's had some less than awesome years. And if he's in a 4 ERA mode, even he will lose some starts. And speaking of which, they did screw with David Price by putting him into the bullpen, and he came out and pitched a game and pitched fairly poorly. I do not discount David Price. I think he's going to get starts this year. I think he's probably a more consistent and predictable bet than some of the guys they have in their starting rotation. There's always going to be injuries. His first outing was not good, but then again, it was pitching in relief in Colorado, so I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass on that, even though those earned runs do count against my ERA where I do own him. The Colorado Rockies have two players in their lineup that are worth mentioning. One is Josh Fuentes. It looked like he was going off the first base thing, but then they signed Crone, which pushed him to the back burner. But Fuentes, with Rogers out, won the third base spot. So much like his cousin before him, Nolan Arenado, he's now the third baseman there. And they did bat him second in the order. Anybody that gets regular bats in Colorado who could put the ball to the bat is going to be meaningful in that. And, a quarter infield eligible guy like Fuentes is at least on a watch list. I had him as somebody I was possibly going to draft in the last round, but based on need in the two leagues where he was in that mindset, I drafted an additional outfielder in one because it was more of a need, and I drafted an additional middle infielder in another because it was more of a need. Had he been a second baseman, I would have probably picked him over Nico Horner, who's not even a starter yet. Though I do like Nico Horner when he comes up in 36 days. Next up on the list is the Minnesota Twins. Nothing really shocking there. I was big on Orlando Arcia last year, and I thought there was something to that. And I was hoping that he would get the shot to play shortstop and maybe show me the thing that didn't come around in 60 days last year. Not that I was drafting him, but he was definitely a watch for me. But they went with Luis Urias as their shortstop. And, that ends my love of Orlando Arcia. Urias is his best to watch. He was a highly touted prospect that in a matter of 48 hours became someone that no one liked. So he might fall into that post-type sleeper thing at some point in the future. The guy that you really need to pay attention to on Colorado is a name that doesn't excite a lot of people, but based on what he's doing and the way they played him in the first games, is Chris Owings. He batted seventh in the first game playing second base, and he played center field in game 2, which means they're trying to get the bats on there. He's always been a guy that I thought could be a pretty good baseball player, and he's had flashes and moments of that. On a team that's going to run, he's already stole a couple bases. He's a guy that I think I really think that I picked up Kiki Hernandez in a league, and I'm to be sort of that jack of all trades on a very short bench league, and I'm going to make that move this weekend for Chris Owings to be that guy, the guy that I'm not going to start him, but he's the guy that I want as a backup on my team, and he may play based on injuries that I have. He might even have more eligibility in your league than you think. San Diego Padres on opening day. The question was, who plays second base for the Padres? Is it the new kid from Korea, who I can't remember his name? His last name's Kim. Is it Jurickson Profar, or is it Jake Cronenworth? And it was Jake Cronenworth. And I think that tells you that he's the guy that's going to get primary position. Now, at the same time, Jurickson Profar played left field in place of Trent Grisham, who is missing the very start of the season, not IL'd or anything like that. But so that might be a situation where they chose Cronenworth to play second and Profar to play left field because they trust both of them to play second, but they only trust Profar to play left field. So we don't have a definitive answer except for the answer that Kim is 3 in the pecking order. Also on their catching site with Nola out, they started Caratini game 1 with Yu Darvish, and they started Luis Camposano game 2 when their second pitcher pitched, whoever that was. And that's in like 2 catcher leagues, the fact that these guys play, and there are going to be moments where they're caught up in one of the highest powered offenses in all of baseball. There's going to be some decency from both of them. I have a better feeling for Caratino than Camposano, only because Caratini's a better fielder, but there is something in leagues where you're deep and you need catchers. He's a guy that's in there because both those guys can hit a little bit, and both those guys will hit well enough not to hurt your average, and both of them may, because of the power of their lineups, get the runs and RBIs that you need. St. Louis Cardinals. I don't know why this is. They're a team that kind of makes me sick, not just because I'm a Cub fan, but because I don't know what the hell they're doing a lot of time. They started the season with Justin Williams as their left fielder. I guess Harrison Bader has a bit of a nagging injury or something, but not an IL stint. He's among the 3 people that I'm going to name who I'm going to say aren't worth talking about because I already mentioned Wyatt Matheson. So number 2 on that list is Justin Williams. And let's hope that they turn out to be great and I can pick them up and they can help my team win. But the truth is they're stopgaps. Texas Rangers, interesting thing that they did, and they have one of those guys that I'm not going to give a crap about by the name of Eli White, who started at DH for them in their first game of the season. But the interesting one is Brock Holt is their starting second baseman. I know that he has third base eligibility on NFBC, probably outfield eligibility on Yahoo. He's going to be the starting second baseman. He's not great, but he's shown over the course of his career the ability to hit the ball for average. He could push 300 on the hitting base. He has good on-base skills, which will keep him in the lineup, and he can play all over the place. So he might be in that Chris Owings mold, that sort of jack of all trades that you have on the bench that can play a game, be good for your team, and you just stay comfortably on the bench. I like Owings more than I like Brock Holt. But Brock Holt, especially in deeper leagues, is available. He's 0% owned in NFBC, just for one example. So you can own him in virtually every league where Brock Holt's mother is not in your league. Eli White was batted 7th, played DH. I don't know anything about him. I'm not going to go into any detail and tell you he's great or he's awful, but he seems to be in that category of, the high 20-year-old journeyman outfielder. It does say something about that particular team's inability to be good. And Kansas City Royals are next. They had some interesting things. I already mentioned with the Mondesi industry, Kyle Lopez, who had gotten beaten out for second base by Hanser Alberto in a 3-way platoon, where Hanser Alberto would start at second versus lefties and with Merrifield versus righties. Don't stay away from Nicky Lopez till he shows something. You can always hold out hope, but I think we've seen enough of him to know who he is. The guy that is interesting is Kyle Isbell, who's the other side of the platoon. He'll play left field when Merrifield plays second versus righties, which is the better side of the infield. He's a guy that's hit at a number of levels. I owned him in my now probably defunct dynasty league, and he's just a guy that hits the ball well. He's in the mold of. He has a video up. Can you hear me, Andrea? Give me a yeah. Well, anyway, Cal Isbell, those guys that hit the ball at every level. Not a lot of power, but 10 home run power. I first saw him when he was part of UNLV's kind of surprising run a little deep into the College World Series. He hit like 9 home runs in the minor in college, but of course they're using aluminum bats. But he is a Las Vegas guy, so he is been playing games versus the Chris Bryants and the Bryce Harpers of the world. I think he's a big league ball player, but he fits in the mold of like the Jeff McNeils, the Nick Madrigals, the Bryce Turangs, where the contact is what leads him. In a stadium like Kauffman, he'd spray the ball around. He'd do pretty well. I think he had 3 hits in his first game, and at that pace, he'll have over 400 hits this year, which I'm not saying is going to happen. But he's a guy that you definitely should watch. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's in a dynasty league, and I said, I really miss the fact that this year 2 guys that were sort of long shots on my team, Jazz Chisholm and Kyle Isbell, both made the rosters, and I don't get to play them. Anyway, and he said, who the hell is Kyle Isbell? So I'm telling you, the Kyle Isbell's worth watching. He's worth drafting in the deepest of leagues if you need an outfielder, because he could run with it. If you're an outfield, if you're a Kansas City Royals drafter, if you're drafting Michael Taylor, who's not horrible, mind you, I'd rather have the potential upside of Kyle Isbell. If you're drafting a healthy Cole Calhoun, Isbell's not quite there yet. Anyway, next up on this list is the Tampa Bay Rays, and we talked about the big move there is Yoshi Tsutsugo at third base. So he's playing first base in place with J.M. Choi. So even in NFBC, where he has third base and outfield eligibility, he might get triple eligibility, which makes him fairly worthwhile. Definitely a player to look at. His last year he batted under 200, but he was a guy that had 30-ish home runs for his last 4 years in the Japanese league. Those home runs don't usually translate exactly, but he has good on-base skills, good batting eye, and he can hit you 25-plus home runs if he plays all the time. The Rays are going to screw around with their lineup a lot, but at least for the beginning, Yoshi Tsutsugo gets my approval, at least for emergency use. Chicago White Sox are next. Chicago White Sox, Lurie Gurriel is the guy that's getting starting time because of Eloy's injury. And the crazy thing is that in game 1, they batted Lurie Garcia 6th and they batted Luis Robert 7th. I don't know what that means. I hope that isn't a regular thing again. Here's a team. Oh, it's Tony La Russa. Yeah, that's why. Because Tony La Russa is a complete moron of a manager. 2 of his best hitters are Luis Robert and Nick Madrigal. So, of course, they're going to bat 7th and 9th. Why didn't it occur to me before? It's Tony La Russa. Andrew Vaughn is a beneficiary of that because he probably has first base eligibility wherever you're at. And he's gonna gain outfield eligibility. Oh, I do want to say this thing. It's like I got the smart TV a while ago when I subscribed to Amazon and I subscribed to HBO Max, and notice that there are a bunch of free things on there. And there's one of the free sites is Pluto TV, and if you go down into their sports, they have a station called Insider, and so that I was watching Insider on Pluto while I was putting together these notes last night, and they're running old college baseball games. So they ran a game last night. The 2 games that were running was a game where Andrew Vaughn was playing for Arizona or whatever it is, and then the second game was a game that California played, which was where Spencer Torkelson's the first pick of the Detroit Tigers were playing, and that was just kind of cool. I'm not saying that you got to sit down and watch all this on TV. But the fact that I could watch this for free, I thought it was kind of cool. And if you want to see these guys in their early times, because the truth is, no one's seen Andrew Vaughn anywhere except for I guess spring training and then what he did in college. Now there's a little bit of a bias to that because they're not going to show games where they struck out 4 times. So he's going to look better than they are, but you can see what the future might bring for both those guys, and I think Vaughn is a real player. The LA Dodgers, they're the one noticeable thing about their lineup is in that outfield spot, even though I like Taylor Ward and you like Brandon Marsh and someone likes Joe Adell, that last outfield spot, batting ninth, goes to Dexter Fowler, which is just, I guess it might be the best thing for them as a team, at least to start the season. But, God, we'd love to see one of those other guys in there. Oakland A's, their starting second baseman is Jed Lowry. And for the first time in the history of me broadcasting, I can report that Jed Lowry is not injured. Jed Lowry right now is not injured. I don't know how long it'll last, but right now he's not injured. And that's pretty impressive. Because it's been I've been doing this 2 years, right? So, then the truth is, if he's healthy, I think there might be something there. But he's a guy. If you ever avoid a guy just because he might get hurt, if you need to pick him up because you need a quick fill in at second base, I think he could be better than a lot of people, and he might be one of the better hitters on that team. But staying healthy is the big problem with the guy. Also, in the first game, their left field spot, they have Stephen Piscotty, who's only gotten 1 at bat so far. They decided to play Chad Pinder starting in left field for the first game, and Rule 5 pick up Ka'ai Tom. Did I say that right? Ka'ai Tom. It's K-A''AI. And I think that is bad news for Piscotty, who's one of those guys that some people like because he can get you some power, and he seems to be a guy that seems to do it every year and bat okay. But it looks like they like these other guys better. And that's a team that doesn't have the bench they once had. I wonder if they're holding them off, Piscotty on the bench, because they just want the bat off the bench, because they don't have the bench they normally have. But anyway, Steve Piscotty has yet to start for them. The Baltimore Orioles, there's a bunch of garbage there. The one guy that's kind of deep on that team who didn't get to start there is I have Pat Valaika as a watch guy in my mind, and so I was a little bummed that Rio Ruiz, who I've seen play in the minors for the Gwinnett Braves a number of times, who's not really that good, won the starting job on that team at second base. But make a note to remember to watch for Valaika, and if you starts playing and you start seeing some hitting, that hitting is real. He actually he hits the ball squarely. And that's something that is a characteristic of who he is, and he might be a good player. And the Orioles are the kind of team that might just let somebody play it out. Most of those guys on that team, the DJ Stewart who's hurt and the Cedric Mullins, scare the crap out of me. It's like I'm pro Trey Mancini, I'm pro Ryan Mountcastle, but not much after that. Boston Red Sox, their leadoff hitter was Kiki Hernandez, who, he did hit a double in the opening game, and they were one of the few guys that got a hit off John Means. And I do think that he is one of those guys that could be beneficial. But like I said earlier, I'm probably, going to be swapping him out for Chris Owings in a league. Also, they started Marwin Gonzalez in left field over Hardin Redfield the first game. Where are my timelines? 11:30. I'm fine. In San Francisco is a team that I'm probably going to watch a lot more of this year than I would. They surprisingly last year were the 5th best team in scoring runs. And as much as I like a good pitcher's duel, I think that the script's been flipped on San Francisco. And you kind of, I had the thing where I picked up Johnny Cueto with the last pick of one draft because he's one of those guys that I've always loved, like Miguel Cabrera, who wonderfully hit a home run in the snow to be the league leader in home runs for a moment. But I think that stadium is not going to protect him from mistakes anymore. And I'm scared of Johnny Cueto. And I tried to swap him out in the first week, but I got outbid on Jake Arrieta. I will swap him out this week. We'll get to that later. But I think there's runs to be had there, and there's a lot of goodness on that team. The one thing that bothered me is that I'm very pro Brandon Belt, and they benched him on the second game for Darren Ruff. Yeah, that Darren Ruff. The only thing I can think of is that in a crucial play in the first game, he made an off-the-mark throw to the shortstop Brandon Crawford, which allowed runners to score to put them behind and lead to an eventual Mariners win. Maybe it was a penalty for not being mentally with it for that game, but I still like Brandon Belt. And there's other guys on that team like Yastrzemski and Alex Dickerson and Donovan Solano. There's a lot of guys on the team to like if they got playing time, and if they can be some percentage of what they were last year, maybe not the fifth highest scoring team, but they're the eighth or ninth. There's going to be totals in that given to everybody. And George is, hey, hello to the chat room. I see Daniel out there. I see Andrew out there. Andrew will be on in about an hour. And he probably wasn't here for the beginning, but I told him, I said, this show, and you get the advice from this show, 73% effective. If you get the second dose by listening to Andrea afterwards, you're up to 95. The second dose is important, you guys. Watch their show. And that's it for the starting lineup thing of the injuries, and that changed a lot about playing time. And those are guys there, and I'm going to get to it at the very end after talking about this. This is waiver wire in context of the guys that I think you should add. And so I'm at that point right now. It's not me. It was the World Health Organization testing out this show on 15,000 people in South Africa. If it doesn't work for you, it's their fault. But anyway, pitching is a little bit very detailed. So I'm going to hit that first. One thing that we really haven't done on this network at all in a while is we haven't really talked about two-star pitchers. And I know that a lot of people like weekly. I like weekly. If somebody said to me, like, what's your favorite version of the game to play? I would say that I want to be able to set my lineups daily, but I only want weekly pickups because I don't like losing to a team that makes 700 moves a year because my roster has 32 men and their roster has 60 because they're playing out of the cut pile. So two-star pitchers become a thing if you're in weekly moves, and I'm going to be looking at that on a weekly basis because that's my preferable way of playing. And there are some pretty interesting two-star pitchers this week. Predicting two-star pitchers is a little bit of an art. I'm not going to say that I'm 100% perfect at this. Some of these guys are going to get, they're going to throw in a different pitcher and he's not going to come with second start. But I'm going to say I'm going to be about 90% on this. There are the guys that should be owned by everybody, which is Herman Marquez, Dustin May, Jordan Montgomery, Frankie Montas, Drew Smiley, who I don't really think an awful lot of, but those guys are on 50% more of leagues. If you actually invest in those guys, there's absolutely no reason why you would bench them on a two-star week. And I wouldn't bench Smiley on a two-star week. He's playing at Washington, at Philadelphia. There are a few that I would just stay away from, partially because of the matchups, partially because the pitchers aren't that good in the first place. So my stay away list is Michael Wacha from the Tampa Bay is going to get his first start at Boston, a second start versus New York at home. I don't really trust Wacha to pitch many innings, and both those lineups, even though they didn't look very good versus John Means Baltimore, are among the better lineups in the game. Luke Weaver has his first game at Colorado, his second game at Cincinnati. That's a stay away. Mike Fultonevich looking all buff going into the season and then going into the spring training and then finishing spring training with an ERA over 15. Has two games versus Toronto and San Diego. San Diego's a great lineup. Toronto's a great lineup, and he's not that good of a pitcher. I hope he gets things together. He was an all-star once, but there's no way at the first week of the season that I want to start out with a 6-run thing. In points leagues, it's different. There'll be enough goodness from Fultonevich to offset the fact that he's probably going to let up 4 runs each game because the strikeouts and the innings will count up. But in head-to-head leagues where your ERA or WHIP are graded as a ratio, he's to stay the hell away from. Jorge Lopez of Baltimore, because he's from Baltimore, but he's playing at New York and Boston. And Brett Anderson in Milwaukee has got Chicago and St. Louis. Don't trust the guy. I think Milwaukee's got pretty bad pitching staff. Those teams might be worse hitters than you think, but I'm still going to study from that. But there are some intriguing matchups, and this is really the thing. Like this is from the guys that will probably be available that I might pick up. And number 1 and number 2, these are going to be the 2 guys first in my lineup. Is Carlos Rodon of the White Sox, who's got a game at the Mariners and a game home versus Kansas City. He's on a great team, so there's a good chance of win. The guy can strike out people. I know he's disappointed people in the past. It seems like their coach has done some tweaking to both he and Dylan Cease's pitching that showed real results, especially late in spring training. I know it's the first week of the season, and if this was the 17th week of the season and you needed to get some goodness out of somebody, I would take the risk for sure. First week, until you have a problem, you probably don't take that risk. And but Carlos Rodon, unlike everyone else on this who's not owned, he was the 3rd pick overall, and there is a lot of talent there. And sometimes it takes a player a little while to develop into a talent. Of the people that are available in the starting pitchers thing, he is the most likely to someday develop into a starting pitcher 1 talent. I'm not saying it's totally likely. It's like 10% likely. But, there was that path that some people have taken for where it takes them a while to get there, like Lucas Giolito. And so there's a chance there. Whereas if I'm picking up David Peterson, who's also a 2-star guy, who's interesting because of the matchups, who's a decent pitcher, he doesn't have the upside that Rondon has. And Peterson's playing Philadelphia at Philadelphia, then home versus Miami. This other guy is Daniel Ponce de Leon, and I can't get over the fact that when he pitched for the St. Louis Cardinals 2 and 3 years ago in spot starts, even important spot starts in September, and even won in the playoffs, he pitched exceedingly well. He did not have a good year last year when he got a chance to pitch, but he's got 2 games versus Seattle, and he's at Seattle and then home versus Milwaukee. Milwaukee's lineup isn't what you think it is. Outside of Christian Yelich, it's pretty meager. I mean, there's some decent players, but there's some pretty bad guys on there. Any team that's starting Travis Shaw, enough said, right? So I'm probably going to target Rodon and Ponce de Leon to fill that slot with Cueto. Get 2 starts this week. If it doesn't work out, I flip them down because there really isn't a lot of great pitchers that are available, and those are about as good as it gets. Jose De Leon of Cincinnati is going to get 2 starts, 1 versus Pittsburgh, 1 at Arizona. The Pittsburgh start is really nice, and he was once a top prospect. And the last one on here, mostly because of the matchup, is Matt Shoemaker, who's going to be home versus both Detroit and home versus Seattle. So it's pretty good matchups. Those are those things. There are some others which they kind of fall in between. They're probably people you would roster in points leagues for sure, but not necessarily in leagues where you count ratios as ratios. And Danny Duffy's got 2 starts, 1 at Cleveland, 1 home versus Chicago White Sox. Nick Pivetta is at home versus the Tampa Bay Rays, and on the road versus Baltimore. Anthony DeSclafani is at San Diego, which is bad, and home versus Colorado. JT Brubaker is one of those Pittsburgh pitchers. I remember reading somewhere that somebody thought this guy had some talent, so I'm not going to write him off completely. And he's got at Cincinnati and home versus Chicago. And then Trevor Williams in Chicago, who's in kind of the same boat. He's at Pittsburgh, home versus Milwaukee. They're guys that they're points leagues. All those guys are points league pickups, but not necessarily in leagues where you're looking for where you don't have the strength of ERA or WHIP to withhold the fact that there's a chance that they're going to screw it for you. It's one thing to have one guy have a bad start. It's an entire thing altogether to have a guy have 2 bad starts. And then we talk a little bit about closers. This is 11:40, so I'm out of time. I did say I'm going to talk until I just run out of things, and if I run out of things a little bit early, that's fine. I don't think I'll run out of things this first week because on the closers, there was an announcement that Alex Reyes is going to be the closer of the St. Louis Cardinals. Don't drop Jordan Hicks because of this. Alex Reyes is extremely talented, and they talked about him pitching a lot of innings, and he's not going to get the innings that he should pitch, being the closer. And you throw on the fact that last year, going into the 2020 season, the day before the Cardinals announced that Kwang Young Kim was going to be their closer, and he he uh, he literally closed one game, pitched well. I mean, he had one of those he came in with 3 runs and let up 1 run, never closed another game the rest of the year. There's going to be some mix in there, and then deep down, the guy they want to finish with is Jordan Hicks, and he's the guy that of those 4 that I would want. Anthony Bass was a guy that I was touting before the season as being a scared his job. So he comes in and pitches 1 outing, lets up 4 runs. He looks pretty terrible. I am going to be. I still have Jose Leclerc, who's hurt in a 15-team weekly league because the guys that I claimed all got claimed for more money, and so I wound up getting him back ranked. But I'm going to make a $1 bid on Miami's Dylan Floro. Because he's the guy that I think, if Bass stumbles 2 more times, will be the closer over John Curtis or Yimi Garcia. So Dylan Floro is the guy I'm going to put a $1 speculative bid on. When you're doing this, I'm just thinking that he's got the makeup to be a closer more than the other guys do. And the truth is about Anthony Bass is he didn't have the makeup. He doesn't have the makeup to be a closer. He's a contact pitcher that induces soft contact, and soft contact guys have to be very, very. I'll get to Bard, but I mean Bard is a preview. When I get to who I'm saying to pick up on waiver wire, Bard is the number 1 name as far as closers go, because when you get to closers, the most important thing is, are they in line to get you saves? But I'll get to that because the whole idea of this is waiver wire in context, and I'm telling you that this is the thought process. I'm looking at injuries creating playing time. I'm looking at how teams view teams on playing time. And then I'm going to make the last thing is going to be the judgment on talent. And I'm going to tell you at every position in shallow and in deep leagues, who are the guys that are available that you should target. So Dylan Floro is a $1 guy. James Karinchak, they brought him in. Their coach said he's not necessarily the closer. They brought him in the first game of the year in the 8th inning. I think Whitgren is the guy to do the speculative pickup on. I might go more than $1 in a 1,000-team league on him on that speculation. But the thing about it is that I think, much like Jordan Hicks, the Indians probably would like him to be the closer. They just haven't seen him act like he wants it. Gregory Soto got the first shot at a save in Detroit. Not that everyone's really in love with Detroit closers. And he converted it after letting up a home run to somebody very poorly. Brian Garcia is the other guy there. Jose Jimenez. I'm going to stick with last year. Soto looked like the best pitcher. I'm going to say that it's opening day jitters. He didn't lose the game, so they're not. You get a little more. You get a little more leeway when you let save than you do when letting up a run. And in a 1-run lead save, it's just not as noticeable. The win sort of cures the wound. Stick with him. Then you get that weird thing that happened in Kansas City. Did you watch that in the first game of the season? The guy that got their save was Wade Davis. They brought Greg Holland in, the guy that we thought was going to be their closer, to pitch in the 8th inning with men on base, and he struck out the first guy. Then he comes in the 9th inning to pitch, and he allows a hit. He walks a guy, allows a hit, gets somebody to hit into a fielder's choice, allows another walk, and they pull him out, and Wade Davis pitches the last 2 innings for the save. So I don't know if Greg Holland is going to be their closer, but it lets you know that his hold on that is weak, and it seems like Wade Davis, even though he's less talented than Josh Stelmount or Scott Barlow, is somebody that you ought to think about. He's also worth that $1 speculative ad. And when I talk about speculative ads on closers in a weekly league that's very deep, it's a long game thing. You pick them up 1 week, and you might hold them for 2 or 3 weeks before it happens, or before you know that it's not going to happen. So you got to have. But the difference is, if you pick them up now instead of in week 3, they're $1 or $2. If you pick them in week 3, once they got the job, they're all of a sudden $150. And this is how you save money. And you got to be thinking this way. if you're in a weekly pickup league when you're looking at closers. Hector Neris seems to be the closer in Philadelphia, though I still own Alvarado in one league. Alex Colomé already blew a save in Minnesota. Taylor Rogers, I think, is the better of the two guys, but he's probably owned in your leagues. Richard Rodriguez got the save versus the Cubs in Pittsburgh, even though their coach said that that's not the guy they're going to go with. So I still think he's the guy in that. Diego Castillo is the guy you want in Tampa Bay. With the Nick Anderson injury, they still seem like they want to play Pete Fairbanks in the high leverage situations because he's the more talented pitcher. Not that Diego Castillo is bad, but Fairbanks is the guy that could strike out the important batters when you need the strikeouts. So I would go Castillo over Fairbanks, and then we still don't know what's going on in Texas between Bush versus Kennedy, and it may be a couple months before we have a save opportunity down there. I like Bard, as I'm saying, he's going to be of the things. I did want to mention one other thing before I get to the waiver wire suggestions, though you've heard most of it throughout the way here, is that if you're in a deep league and you lose a pitcher for a week or two, you know it's not permanent. It might not be a bad idea that instead of picking up a fairly poor a pitcher that you don't have awful high hopes on, like Cole Irvin, who had a nice last game of the season in the spring training, it might be better off for you to pick up another reliever who pitches a lot of innings, like an Alex Reyes, someone in the mold of a Devin Williams. And the two guys that may not be on your mind that way are J.P. Wendelken of the A's is one of those guys I look at, and the guy that I really like is Julian Merriweather. Julian Merriweather actually got a save pitching a 3-strikeout 10th inning, but it was a 10th inning save. He's not the closer in Toronto, but he's a guy that their management said he's going to get a lot of innings pitched, and he's kind of the guy that could be in the mold of Devin Williams or Josh Hader, or really, it's the mold of Dylan Betances, who sort of created that spot. And he might not be somebody that you're looking at. So here we get to the waiver wire itself, and this is going to require me to maximize my screen a little bit. So I'm going to have less sight of the chat room, and I'm go side by side. I'm going to go through the positions, and I'm going to tell you the guy that I want and a couple other names in case they're not available. The general rule on this is that they got to be 60% available, they have to be 40% available or more, which means not owned in 60% or less. There's just a lot of guys in the 50s that are better than that, but I've given you more names so you don't know it. If you have a guy in your league, when you go search for who's my shortstop that I'm going to take up, and there's a shortstop available who's only owned in 70% of the league, he's probably the guy you want. But because he's not available in most leagues, I'm not going to talk about him in general. That's the sort of thing that you come to the chat room and say, hey, what about this guy? He's available. And I'll give you my opinion on that. But it's not going to be universal, so it's not going to be that thing. So we start with catcher, which is really, really dull. Where was my note on the catcher? When I looked at that, it's like in the shallow leagues, there's a lot available, especially if you're in one catcher. But if you're on like NFBC, it seems like almost every catcher is owned. And so it goes from nothing really good to it goes from some decency to nothing really good. So in a 10 to 12 team league, 50% owned, the guy that I'd want a catcher is Buster Posey in the shallow league. He's not available in deep leagues. Two other names are Mitch Garver. Garver is owned in 56% of leagues also. And he even though people were saying that Ryan Jeffers was going to be a starter, Garver got the starts at catcher for the Twins, and he's only 2 years removed from a phenomenal year. And then the 70% owned is Alexander Kirk. He's going to catch a couple games a week and probably DH a couple games a week, which when you're looking at like the number 12 catcher in the league, he could very easily, because he's probably the best hitter of all the catchers. And if he gets 4 days worth of bats a week, he'll definitely be in the top 12 by the end of the year. The question on him is the if. In the deepest leagues, the 50-16 team leagues, the guy that really should be rostered who isn't is Victor Caratini. He's 30% owned on NFBC. Beyond that, there's a lot of Flotsam Jetsam. Kurt Suzuki is owned in 51% of leagues. Everybody really likes Max Stassi, and there's reason to like him. He hits the ball so hard. I just don't know how. I'm a guy that drafts back end catchers in leagues, and I could not bring myself to draft Mastasi, even though he had one of those seasons last year where he hit like 7 home runs and 48 at bats or whatever, which made us salivate when it was Jared Walsh. It made us salivate when it was Bobby Delbeck, and I don't really care when it's Max Stassi because I don't think he hits well enough to play any other position. And he was the only guy in baseball last year because to allow more stolen bases than games started at catcher. I think he started at 24 games at catcher and left 26 stolen bases. I don't know how a guy who's that bad at a crucial part of the game fits into the mind of Joe Madden. I don't think so. Suzuki is a guy that hit 270. He'll probably, even though he's not the best defensive catcher, he's much better than Stassi. Also on there, deeper in there, kind of there's 2 ways to go. One is the long game if you have space. Maybe not week 1, but somewhere online. Adley Rutschman's owned in 32% of leagues. He's worth holding on to for a little bit. He's definitely worth holding on to in leagues where trading is allowed. Because somewhere down there you're going to have somebody in there. I would speculate at some point on. I have not gotten to the full relief pitcher thing yet. That's going to come at the end. I would speculate on Cal Higashioka, the one guy that could win your league and probably lose your league is Gary Sanchez, who will have 5 times as many strikeouts as he has home runs, maybe 10 times. The starting catcher in a decent lineup is going to be pretty good. And then the last way to go about it is to go with somebody who's steady. He'll give you some production. And Roberto Perez is only owned in like 11% of leagues. Then we on the first base. First base in the shallow leagues, Andrew Vaughn is owned in 60% of leagues on Yahoo as of this morning. He was owned less than that yesterday. He's the first guy on there. But there are guys in there like Bobby Dahlbeck is in there at 49%. Yuli Gurriel at 36%. And Carlos Santana at 59%. Those are pretty decent guys. Now, in the deepest of leagues, the guy that really should, who probably every show I've ever had, I've said, this guy should be picked up, is Oakland A's DH Mitch Moreland, who on NFBC is owned in 32% of leagues. He is their DH. He's going to play those games. Olson's a great first baseman, but he's going to hit. He's batting 5th and 6th in the lineup. And in a deep league, it's amazing that he's available that many. The number 2 guy on there, and the only guy I put down a second, is Josh Fuentes, the third baseman for the Rockies, who can hit a little bit. He's not quite the prospect that many of the Rocky guys are, but on that team, he could have 20 plus home runs, steal you 6 or 7 bases. The only drawback is that Cron looks good, and they really want Brendan Rodgers. So when Brendan Rodgers comes, the question is whether they'll move him to second or move him to the bench. But for the next month, he's definitely a player to look at. Nick Lowe. I had this conversation about Nick Lowe yesterday on the phone with a new friend of mine who will probably join us on Monday. His name's Adam the Jimmy. And the thing about Nick Lowe is it's not a good team, and Guzman looked pretty good in the preseason. And so I don't know if he's good enough to be a guy that I want to roster when I really don't believe that he's going to be playing regularly somewhere down the line. And in a shallow league, there's so much available at first base because the Bobby Dahlbecks, the Jarris Walshes, the Andrew Vaughns, the Brandon Belts, the Mitch Morelands, the Joey Vottos aren't even being drafted, that I'm not going to think that far down the list. But if you're in a 15-team, 30-man roster league like the TGFBI thing is, and Nate Lowe's available, I understand the logic between picking him up. But if you're picking up Nate Lowe, you've got some significant problems. So Nick Lowe would be a wait and see guy in most instances, But desperation is desperation. You shouldn't be that desperate at first base the first week of the season, in my mind. Second base. The standby is Cesar Hernandez. So he's like, are there guys in your leagues that are better than Cesar Hernandez on your waiver wire? And that's the way to look at this one here. And in shallow leagues, Ty France is the guy that I'm going to go with. I've talked about him before. I'm not going to go into great detail for him, but he's going to be a big part of the Seattle offense for quite a little while. Could very easily hit you 30 home runs out of second base. Other guys, and I didn't mention on first base because he went up the next page. Brandon Belt's only in 14% of shallow leagues. I would rather have Brandon Belt 1,000 times over Nate Lowe. Nick Madrigal is 59% owned. Should be owned more than that on Yahoo. Josh Rojas, the guy who got the start at shortstop for the Arizona Diamondbacks, should be owned. Don Solano is, like I said, I'm buying into the Giants' offense a little bit. Don Solano is going to bat third in that offense. You guys hit 300. He said he's made some changes to add a little bit more power, and we've seen guys who never showed power do something spectacular overnight, like Didi Gregorius, like Jeff McNeil. I'm not predicting those kind of outcomes. I don't think it's 28 plus, but he could be a 13 home run, 100 RBI guy who hits 320. And then in the deepest of leagues, Chris Owings is 0% owned in NFBC, and he should be owned in a lot more leagues than that. He should be owned in probably 30, 40% of leagues. He's going to help you out in stolen bases. Adam Frazier has been asked about. Let me go through the rest of this second base that I go through. I also have Don Solano at second base because he actually that's where he plays at second base. Kevin Newman, 56% owned, was one of the best contact hitters, and getting on base with batted balls. He was good at it last year. One of the best in spring training. You might consider it on. And then Brock Holt is the guy that I mentioned before. Adam Frazier bats leadoff for Pittsburgh, and he's done that for a couple of years. And for some reason, I've seen the guy having decent numbers year in, year out, and I've never once in my life rostered the guy. Partially because there's an advantage of batting first, but that advantage is least effective on teams like the Pirates. And he's also in that category like Donaldson Solano, who doesn't seem to give you much when it comes to power nor speed, though he probably will steal more bases than Donaldson Solano. I could imagine a world where Frazier steals 10. Likely it's more like 5. But the real question is it's that the offense just isn't that good. And I've never had the point to put him in. I've never gotten the point. The rule about, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, but it's my thing. The question people ask is, should I drop this guy right? And the answer to that, when you say drop this guy, is like, you should only drop a player if there's a better player for you to drop. And I don't think I'm ever going to be if I'm in a situation where Adam Frazier is the answer to the better player, well, that's going to be a pretty bad season, and I've never got there. Anyway, is he an okay guy? Stopgap? Sure. I'm surprised I've never picked him up just to cover for a couple weeks, but I never have. On the shortstop, in shallow leagues, Don Solano is my pick at shortstop there. He's still shortstop eligible on Yahoo because he played a lot of games there last year, like 50, 60 games. There's a number of players that Jorge Polanco, 49%. The other two guys I want to bring up here, even though they're really not 12-team eligible yet, but guys you should watch are Jazz Chisholm, because if everything broke the right way for Jazz Chisholm, he could be a 2020 guy. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think he might be like a 11-20 guy. He might 10 home runs, 10-20 guy. And the batting average could suck the life out of you. Willie Castro, but Polanco is owned in 49%, and he's a real player, and Don Solano. In the deeper leagues, the 15, 16-team leagues on NFBC, Jose Iglesias is available in 32% of leagues, and he's the cream of the crop when it comes to shortstops. though Kevin Newman is available. And a guy that definitely should be watched is Yu Chen Cheng of Cleveland, who's a shortstop. I think he's their number 2 or number 3 prospect, and he got the nod to play first base on the first game of the year. The guy has decent hit tools. He's not a super power hitter, but if you look at his minor league record, he's a guy that he could hit you. I don't think he's a 300 hitter, but he's a pushing 300 hitter. I guess I'm saying that he could be as good as Cesar Hernandez, maybe even a little bit better. But he's a guy that if that's the guy they played first base over Jake Bauers, they're going to get him into the lineup because that was their opening day lineup, and it wasn't based on some weird thing. So, no, I'm just saying it. Like if you're in a 15 team 30 roster spot, a guy like this guy at shortstop might actually be someone that you could watch. I don't think he's ever going to be the guy that is a difference maker for your team, but he could be a above average replacement for something that you lose throughout the year. Third base, in Yahoo, Austin Riley is only owned in 58% of leagues. He was a guy that actually wanted to draft in more leagues and never got it because he got it earlier. There is a 30% chance that he's going to be a complete failure this year, but there's a 30% that it'll be good enough, and a 30% that he could be a breakout player because he did some things last year to cut the strikeout rate. And if those things stick, he's going to be a very good player for you. And he has third base and outfield eligibility. As we mentioned before on Yahoo, Ty Francis, third base eligibility, Yuli Gurriel's eligibility, Jonathan Solano, and then I'm actually surprised that Jonathan India is only in 32% of the league because it's pretty obvious that he's a starter for the Reds. He's going to be second base, third base, and he's one of the top prospects in the game. Does that mean he's going to be awesome? Not necessarily, but he could be awesome. I'm shocked he's only owned at 32%. In the deeper leagues of third base, the only name that really pops out to me is Yoshi Shitsugo. His fill-in, he's at 38% owned. His fill-in responsibilities for J-Man Choi. But Evan Longoria is out there at 39%. He's got a little bit of a playing time issue because they're going to be screwing around that a little bit. Wilmer Flores got to start at first base in that second game because of the belt benching. Asdrubal Cabrera started at third base over Eduardo Escobar for Arizona, so he's going to be a part of their team. And so we're just looking for someone, a live body with some playing time. And of course, Brock Holt is third base eligible and 0% owned. Would I rather have Adam Frazier or Brock Holt? In my mind, it's like, wow, that's a tough call. I mean, Brock Holt's going to bat 7th, 8th, or 9th in that lineup until they get smarter because he actually is one of their better guys getting on base. And one guy that we did like on the Rangers, who Leo Tavares was a guy that we talked about for stolen bases. He has, as they actually played their games, batted at the end of their lineup as opposed to the top, which diminishes his value a little bit. As it's up in the air. Brock Holt or Adam Frazier? I think I'd take Brock Holt, but it's close. Anyway, then we get to outfield, and they're in shallower leagues. There's a lot of good outfielders that are still available. Alex Dickerson's available in 27% of leagues. Lorenzo Cain of the Brewers, who is still good, 52% of league. He came back like the last week of last year and in the playoff thing, and he hit throughout all that stuff. He's like he hits, and he could. I mean, the days of him stealing 25 bases are over, but he's still going to steal you 10 plus. And then, so the three outfielders I would pick up are Kane at 52, Dickerson at 27, Ramil Tapia at 33. How am I doing on time? I'm at 12:08. Okay, I'm doing right about time. Other names to note in deeper leagues, because there's a lot. Aaron Hicks, who's batting third for the Yankees at 46%. Hunter Dozier, who doesn't get enough love, 51%. Adam Duvall, Robbie Grossman, Chris Owings is even available there. And I do think that because of the upside of it, I want to be paying attention to Anthony Alford. If the changes that he made at the end of last year that translated to positive things in spring training translate to the regular season, he's the one guy that I like Brian Hayes, who doesn't, but he's the one guy of that field of garbage that is the Pirates' offense that I want. I hope he does well because actually, I root for almost everybody to do well. I'd like to see better players in the outfield in the deeper leagues. Tim LaCastro led off, and the guy knows how to get on base and steal bases. He's available. He's only on 46% of the time. Yoshisugo at 34%. Anthony Alford at 5. Those are the deeper guys. Also available is Shogo Akiyama. I mean, I hear Nick Senzel's already a little bit banged up, and I think that when he comes back, that kind of story is horrible. He he was late to camp, so he's behind. He's not really hurt. He's just not ready yet. He was late to camp because he was behind because his wife was out on a walk and a tree fell on her. So he left camp to take care of that, so he fell 2 weeks behind. What a horrible story. Anyway, they're going to play him, and he's the guy. I think they like Senzel the most, but Senzel can't stay on the field. He's the guy that's the next in line to play center field. Akil Baddoo at 17% owned. He still hasn't played yet for the Tigers, but I'm not convinced that there's anybody better than that on that team. Brock Holt, Roman Quinn at 5% owned. He'll steal your bases. And the truth is, I don't really even care that he's only going to play some of the time because the less he plays, the less he'll drag down your average, but he'll still steal 15 or so bases with minimal playing time. With a lot of playing time, he could steal you 30. And then you got the two guys in Kansas City, Michael Taylor and Kyle Isbell, who I talked about before, 17 and 13% owned. Starting pitchers. Brady Singer has more than 50% availability. Trevor Rogers of Miami. Dylan Cease, who's worked on some stuff and looks pretty good. Adam Wainwright. The other thing on the pitching is that this is a time when in both deep and shallow leagues where there are some really good pitchers who are injured, and it might be worthwhile whether you have an injury slot or just because what's there isn't the greatest in the world. But you should make sure that Framber Valdez will be out for a couple months. Somewhere in there gets everything. I know that in my NFBC league at DGFPI, Luis Severino is not owned, and so if I can't get anyone else, I'll pick up Luis Severino for $1. But Chris Sale, Noah Syndergaard, Kwang Young Kim, Jake Odorizzi, AJ Puck, these are all guys that aren't starting to start the season who could be really good pitchers for you and could be available because your league is shallow enough that it's hard to hold on to them. On the relief pitcher side, the two guys that I'm giving the go to are Daniel Bard and Jake McGee. Daniel Bard is under 60% owned. Jake McGee is at 60% owned. I would rather have McGee than Bard, but both those guys are good enough and have the moniker closer attached to them enough. I know people say that McGee doesn't, but his competition is a guy that has been critical. So Mitch Harston said they drafted Brendan Rodgers and Jonathan Villar. Both are. I'm looking at the following: Carlos Hernandez, highest floor; Jonathan India, Rojas, and Chisholm, all with better ceilings and risk. If it were a dynasty league, I would say Chisholm, but he has way too much swing and mix in him for me to be the guy if I have these other choices. I think Rojas, India, both of them are the guys that will that outside of the stolen bases that Chisholm brings you thing, Rojas and India's upside are probably India's is probably better than Chisholm's, unless you count the fact that Chisholm's a guy that has the speed to be a 30 stolen base guy if he ever figures out how to steal bases better than he has. He has stole well enough. I would probably take it for the Rodgers thing. I would probably take Rojas first, India second, Hernandez third, Chisholm fourth. And the reason for Rojas is he's going to stay in that lineup until people start coming back from injuries, which would be right about the time Brendan Rodgers, who you said you had, should be starting to play. There's that. None of these guys really make up the steals that you're losing from Villar, but very few people in the league do. You probably have to do some kind of shifting and bring in an outfielder like LeCastro or like Roman Quinn if you want to make up for Villar's thing, because Villar is one of maybe a handful of people who could steal you 30, 35 bases. Chisholm will probably get you 10 or 15, but it doesn't make up what you lost, and the other stuff might not be as good. So in that, I'm going to take Rojas first, India second. Rojas first. And if you need two, because the only reason you drafted Villar is for stolen bases. You gotta think that you need stolen bases. So I would probably find a way to roster LeCastro and Rojas. Though realizing that LeCastro will fall out of favor when Calhoun returns in 3 or 4 weeks. Matt Barnes, I'm going back to the relief pitchers. Matt Barnes is also available. Where am I doing? 12:15. I'm doing fine. 15 minutes to Andy. And if you want to write how this show was, I'm going to get better. The real thing is I'm trying to make sure that I work in a linear pattern, because I have a tendency to be all over the place. And I got a thank you in the chat room, so that's something. The other guys that I would target in deep leagues are Ian Kennedy is the guy I would pick in Texas, a relief pitcher. Though the other guys are available, I'm going that way. In the deep leagues, I'm going to see if Nick Wingren's available. I'm going to see if Diego Castillo is available, and I'm going to see if Dylan Floro is available. I assume I'm going to get Floro in that bunch because he's going to be a buck. And with that, I've gone through what's all the buzz on Merriweather. Merriweather is a guy that I like, but he's Josh Hader before Josh Hader was the closer. He could be Devin Williams. He could be Dylan Betances. He's a guy that has who should be a starter, has 4 good pitches, but he's a little bit developmental. He comes in as a reliever, and they said that they're putting him in that role like they put Alex Reyes, because Toronto Blue Jays know that if they were fully healthy, Merriweather wouldn't be a starter this year, though he's going to be a starter down the road. So they want him to be, because if they're fully healthy, Nate Pearson will be back. It's just some other people. So they want to pitch him 100 innings, but he's got the kind of stuff to really make a difference with 100 innings. Should I drop Bass and pick up Bard? Probably. I've had numerous conversations. Some of them you've been privy to, where I've talked to Andrea about Bard, and she loves Bard like it's, I don't know, chocolate cake. And me, I just kind of like him a little bit. She loves him. I kind of like him as a friend. But it's really just the Colorado stuff. In a points league, it's all about the save, and Bard is going to get the saves. I think at the end of the year, Bard will have more saves than Bass, because I think Bass might lose his job. The problem with Colorado is that I've really never been in a situation where I really trusted their closers, probably since they had Hudson Street on their team. If you listen to one of the older podcasts, Fantasy Focus, they used to always joke about how horrible Josh was. It was Brian Fuentes was their closer, but the truth is that's the way that those games run in Colorado. It's like the difference between being the Colorado closer and being somewhere else is that everybody's going to blow a few saves. Every team goes into the season knowing that they're going to lose 3 to 5 games in the 9th inning, because that's just life. The difference between Colorado and that is that and being the closer in Miami, or being the closer in Boston, or being the closer almost anywhere else, is that when you blow a save there, it might be 3 runs. And the other stuff just kind of is ugly. But I would drop Bass for Bard. And opponent's like, apparently Andrea says no. But then, that's saying, this is not me liking him. It's like me saying that among the guys that are closers, he's worth having. The talent's there. Just he's going to be one of those 3.5 ERA closers. And that's where we get to here. Let's see if there's any other notes here. Yeah. Oh, there was a question about Merriweather. Yeah. In the last game, Dolis pitched the 8th, pitched pretty well. Romano pitched the 9th, but they went in extras because this was a tie game. Merriweather came in the 10th and pitched 3 innings, 3 strikeout innings. If you're in a situation where a middle reliever that gets some innings with high strikeout totals and low WHIP, Merriweather is in the category of people that you should be aware of. And I'm going to build that list throughout the year because it's something that's hard to really gauge until people play. You know that Devin Williams is going to be the guy in Milwaukee, but we have no idea who's going to be the guy like that in Chicago. As much as I like Dwayne Underwood or whatever, you don't know who the guy like that's going to be in Oakland. You don't know. Wendell can be that, but Angels, Houston, we don't know yet, and we'll see it form as we get more than 2 games under our belt. I got 10 minutes left. You really shouldn't fire a closer after 1 screw-up. That is true. But the question that comes to is there a better option out there? And Daniel Bard is probably going to give you more strikeouts, is probably going to keep the closer job longer. It's like if it wasn't Daniel Bard we were talking about, if someone said to you, hey, I'm thinking about dropping Bass for Aroldis Chapman, what do you think? You wouldn't blink, and the reason is Chapman's a better closer than Bass. Based on what I've seen of Bass in the past, and the thing is that he may not have the closer mentality. He looked horrible in the 1 start. I think that I can make that simple statement that Bard is a better closer than Bass. Now, he's not as good as Aroldis Chapman, mind you, but he's better than Bass, and so I'd make that move. Would you take Kikuchi, Webb, or Cease for $10 fab? A lot of people love Kikuchi a whole lot more than I do. He's going to have some good games. He's going to have some bad games. Webb seems to be the surprise thing out of the Giants. $10 fab. Cease, I would take Cease for $10 fab of the bunch, because if you looked at what he did in the spring training, it seems like you'd like the spring training doesn't mean much, but the idea that he got so much better as the thing went along meant that he was picking up things. Because the guy's got a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. He could be a great pitcher. I would take Cease for $10 fab. Last thing I want to talk about, because I'm going to get off this by 10:30, and like I said, be aware of this. I might come back at this time next week, but like I said at the beginning, I have a regular, we're in this lockdown thing, and I have a regular Zoom call with my nephew at 9 o'clock on Saturday, and that's important to me, which means that if I don't get prepared completely on Friday, I don't think I could be prepared by 11. So I think Sunday might be a better move for me. And like today, actually cut him a little bit short, because usually we don't talk for as long as we did today. But today we talked for an hour and a half. Anyway, there's something that I look at in fantasy baseball and I think is just stupid. And it's like, I don't understand how we accept the fact in fantasy baseball that some players go into the season with no position. Fantasy football is 10 times more popular than baseball, and there's nobody on there that goes, oh, hey, Taysom Hill, he plays offense somewhere. You play fantasy basketball, there's nobody that plays nothing. It's like everybody in the world knows that people play a position. And now I know that this is partially because the development of fantasy baseball has been left to chance. The DH was taken into play in 73. In the late 70s, the rotisserie guys started fantasy baseball, and if you want to be a purist, they played NL only, no DH, no utility. They didn't have to worry about it right off. And then when people made the modifications, people looked at it and said, hey, what do we do about these guys that play DH? And so we have this situation where we play somebody at utility, and that's all right. I don't have any problem with the utility spot. There's a flex in football. There's a flex in basketball. There's a flex in almost every sport. The problem is that when I looked at the Chicago roster, and I said to myself, with Eli's injury, Vaughn moves to the outfield. It opens up DH, and their DH is going to be a platoon with Zach Collins on the good side and Yerman Mercedes on the other side. And even though everybody on the planet knows that they're catchers, we play like they're not. And Zach Collins in a 60-game season, which was totally screwed up, he played 9 total games, 2 at first, 1 at catcher. The other one's at a pinch hit role and 2 is DH between the two. Yerman Mercedes played 1 game, 1 pinch hit at bat, and he's a utility on sites. That's just nuts to me, It's like I don't understand why we have to wait in some cases 2-3 weeks for Marcus Semien to get second base eligibility when we all know he's a second base. We're like, we're going to play this dumb game, and literally people get mad because you don't play on a site that works for this fixture. It's like, well, I don't know how you can play on that site. They only have 5-game eligibility. Like 5-game eligibility is fine in most cases. Admittedly, over the course of a lifetime, you run into a couple of anomalies. The first anomaly I remember is Victor Martinez, who played catcher. Then the next season he got injured in spring training, so didn't play a single game. And then it was announced before the next season that he was no longer going to play catcher. And Yahoo gave him catcher eligibility. I don't see why you wouldn't give him catcher eligibility for that 1 year, realizing it's going to go away. Or, I don't know. It's just kind of crazy. We play in a situation where we accept the fact that some sites say that there are baseball players who don't play a position. That just seems insane to me. And it really is. It's kind of the DH's fault. And the crazy thing about DH is people love DH. And don't get me wrong. I'm a middle ground on DH. I actually, on principle, I don't like it. But the truth is, I kind of like the fact that one league has it, the other league doesn't. Because I like the fact that Albert Pujols can play out his years, or Miguel Cabrera can play out his years. Nothing cooler than that. But we don't have to have it everywhere. We can have the game where everyone plays position. But the idea that somebody doesn't have position, I don't know how we came to accept that. And with that, I'm going to end this thing at 12:26. Andrew will be on in a little bit. And with that, I do thank you guys coming out the chat room. Like I said, pay attention to the board. If you have a direct question, come on during the chat. I'll answer it to the best of my ability. I actually think that this website, the whole Lenny Melnick network, is the strongest when you have many different voices talking. And I can tell you how much I hate Jock Peterson, and Andrea can tell you how much she loves Jock Peterson. And you get this information pumped into your head, and you get to make the decision. Because if you're just listening to me and doing what I say, I don't really want to know you. But if you're listening to me and your brain is clicking, and you're figuring things out for yourself based on some more knowledge that I give you, then we can be friends. And like I said, you're going to meet one of my new friends, Adam the Jimmy, on Monday night on the round table. And with that, I'm going to say good night. Remember Lenny shows on Sirius? He's always looking for phone calls. I think George is back on Sunday at 6, and then of course the flagship show where the chat room is king, and Lenny is the Pontifex Rex. He's the bigger guy. Monday at 9 a.m. every day of the week, every weekday. And with that, I'm going to say good afternoon, and here comes Andrea. And I should be a little smoother at hitting end broadcast.